Gonzaga pursued Greek wing Neo Avdalas before ultimately landing Tyon Grant-Foster instead. Was that the right choice?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Folks, take control of your finances by using Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off your first year. Well, it is a mailbag edition here of the Locked On Zags podcast. We got a lot to get to. We're talking summer league standouts, especially after the last few days where we saw some of our Zags really play well to close out the league. We got some WNBA expansion talk, what a Gonzaga, the basketball tournament team might look like as that event gets underway, some high school recruiting talk, all sorts of good stuff here. We're going to get right into it. This first question comes from Anthony via Gmail. Anthony says, I was watching the U20 EuroBasket event and Neo Avdalas looked incredible, dropping a triple-double for Greece against Israel. I know Gonzaga was interested, so with Tyon Grant-Foster still waiting on a waiver, do you think the staff wishes they landed Greek Freak 2.0 instead? Here's an interesting question. I think a couple of things. One, I don't think the Zags have any regret or any concern really about Tyon Grant-Foster. Obviously, every day that goes by where that waiver is not approved is a bit more concerning, not even from they're not going to approve it perspective, but this is one less day that Grant-Foster gets to spend around the team, gets to spend in Spokane, getting used to his surroundings, getting his bearings, getting used to his teammates, all of that stuff. So it's unfortunate that this waiver is continuing to take as long as it is. I don't think Gonzaga would have pursued Grant-Foster. I don't think they would have, put a lot of their eggs into the Tyon Grant-Foster basket if they didn't feel largely confident that they would be able to get him approved for that waiver and eligible to play for them this upcoming season. Having said all of that, Neo Avdalas is incredible. This kid, 6'8" wing. We talked about him a few times on the show when Gonzaga was connected to him. He was a draft prospect that a lot of people thought was going to stay in the NBA draft as opposed to coming over to college. He instead did withdraw from the draft and ended up committing to Virginia Tech. And you might be thinking, well, why did Gonzaga let him go? Because if he went to Virginia Tech, Gonzaga must have let him go. That's not necessarily the case. Virginia Tech was very, very invested in recruiting Neo Avdalas. They were in on him months before anybody else, including Gonzaga, was really invested in him. And I think a key thing, I saw this in a note about Avdalas and his kind of role for Virginia Tech, they're going to let him kind of play point guard. He's going to be the primary ball handler. He's the most talented player on that roster by a pretty considerable margin. This is not quite like Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey at Rutgers, but Virginia Tech doesn't have a lot of talented players and they don't land a lot of high profile players. So for them, they really pushed everything in to get Avdalas on campus. And that included kind of promising him a role that he was not going to get at Gonzaga. So the question of does Gonzaga wish they had Avdalas instead of Tyon Grant-Foster? I don't know that question is the relevant question, because I don't think Gonzaga was going to be able to land Avdalas or was going to be able to make the promises necessary, whether it was financial promises, whether it was role promises, playing time, things like that. I mean, I think financially they could have hung with Virginia Tech, but I don't think they were willing to promise the things that Virginia Tech was willing to give him and what he valued. He wanted a role where he's going to play 30 plus minutes a night, have the ball in his hands. And if that's what he wanted, then he made the right choice. And I don't think it ultimately, Tyon Grant-Foster is not going to have that role at Gonzaga. He's going to have the ball a lot, but Braden Smith and now Mario Saint-Superi are going to be more of the primary ball handlers when they're on the floor. And Avdalas just wouldn't have done that. But yeah, he's great. I cannot believe he's going to Virginia Tech and he's not getting a ton of fanfare. And I know that if you're talking who's going to be the ACC newcomer of the year? It's probably going to be Cameron Boozer at Duke or maybe Mikal Brown at Louisville or somebody like that. But Avdalas is very, very good. And I think he's going to turn a lot of heads this year. And I do think Gonzaga fans will be like, man, it would have been cool to have him on campus, but I'm not sure it was ever all that realistic based on what he wanted out of his college experience. Next question here comes from Darren Via Discord, Darren says, of all the high school recruits Gonzaga is pursuing, who would you most want them to land a commitment from? And could you rank the top 5? Absolutely, I can. And it was tough. This was genuinely tough. I mean, it would be easy to just go by like class ranking, obviously, but in terms of what fits Gonzaga, what they're looking for, also, we're talking about a few players in the 2027 class and a few players in the 2026 class. So you can't just compare straight across with their rankings. There's about 7 or 8 guys that I'm really excited about that Gonzaga is pursuing, or at least in some way loosely connected to. So cutting it down to 5 was a little bit difficult. I feel bad about some of the guys that got left off, but for me, number 1 is the guy we talked about on Sunday's show, Tyran Stokes, the number 1 ranked recruit in the 2026 class, a 6'7", 245-pound monster who's playing at Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks, the same high school as Dusty Stromer. Tyran Stokes is an absolute machine. He's from Louisville originally. He's been pursued by Kansas, Kentucky, Louisville, as well as Oregon, USC, but he is planning to visit Gonzaga. He's the best high school player in the country right now, and would give Gonzaga something that they so rarely have, like a dominant score first wing is just like not a role Gonzaga's really had all that much on their roster. Like their wings are often like 3-point shooters or like small ball 4s, like the way Corey Kispert was. Julian Strother was close, but he was never like, like the guy offensively who did all the scoring the way that Tyran Stokes has been in high school and would be in college wherever he goes. Number 2 for me is Ikenna Elozie, who's a top 10 recruit in the 2026 class. He's a little bit of an undersized point guard, but he's a pure point guard. He's a great facilitator, very good scorer, has the potential to be like one of the best guards in college basketball. He's listed Gonzaga in his top 8. He is planning a visit to Spokane, although we do not know when. He's also like Alabama's in the mix, tons of other schools in the mix for him right now. I have him ahead of Baba Olatunji, who is the number 1 ranked recruit in the 2027 class. Now I do have Olatunji 3rd on this list, but I'm a little bit skeptical of Olatunji. For starters. Most of the early reporting about the 2027 recruiting class is that it's not particularly strong. Olatunji is 6'9", but he is 170 pounds. Like I said multiple times on the show, as I read this, I believe it was Eric Bossi, who's a director of scouting for 247 Sports. I think he's the one who wrote that Olatunji is a few cheeseburgers away from being called skinny. Like he is so small and so thin that it's just like you need to see him fill out a little bit. He's a teenager, so I'm sure that he will. But right now, I would rather have Elozie, who's a year older, a bit more of a complete product, and a pure point guard, which Mark Few and the Zags do so much with, as opposed to a 6'9" wing, who I think could develop into a really good player, but I'm just not quite sure he's there yet. So Stokes is 1, Elozie's 2, Olatunji is 3, and then we got 2 more 2026 prospects. Cameron Holmes is a small forward playing in Arizona. His older brother, Dayron Holmes, was at Dayton and was an All-American for the Flyers and was a first-round pick by the Denver Nuggets. He did not play last year with Denver because of an injury, but played well in the summer league. Cameron is a super high-level athlete. It's been reported that Gonzaga is very aggressive in their pursuit of Cameron Holmes. Like this is a kid they really have circled that they want to bring in for that 2026 class. He's a 5-star. He's rocketed up the rankings. Again, not quite as high level as Tyran Stokes, but somewhat similar as a small forward wing type who has a lot of scoring mentality and a super good athleticism. And then number 5, guy we've talked about a whole bunch on the show, 7-foot center Sam Funches, also in the 2026 class. Funches is set to visit Spokane for Craziness in the Kennel early October. He's a guy who was supposed to visit back in February, but his team was still in the state playoffs, so that visit got postponed, being pursued by a lot of other high-profile programs, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, LSU, among many others in the mix for him. But 7-footer guy who's also a very solid rim protector. He fell in some of the rankings when he played in some of the summer circuits, so I think there's a little bit of development still to be done for him, but Gonzaga's done some truly tremendous things with bigs out of the high school ranks, and I wouldn't be surprised if Funches is their next super high-level success story if they're able to convince him to come to campus and play for the Zags starting in 2026. Well, the basketball tournament is underway, and it has been forever since Gonzaga put together a team. If they had, what might that roster look like for this year's event? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, do you ever wish managing your money just felt a little bit easier? Because with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning for a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's kind of like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility of and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is more than just a generic budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. I've found personally, I really like having everything in one place. I don't want to have to go to multiple different apps or have a spreadsheet where I'm tracking everything. I just want to go to one spot, manage my day to day. It's so much easier with Monarch Money. So take control of your finances by using Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off for your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still rolling through some great questions here for Mailbag Monday as we look ahead to this week in July, the end of Summer League. We'll get to that in a bit, but this was the question. It's taken up the whole segment here because it's a fun one to talk about. This one comes from Pilot Cam on Instagram, who says, been love watching TBT this year, but as always, it makes me wish Gonzaga still had a team. If you could have constructed a TBT team for this year, keeping it as realistic as possible, who would you have on it? Yes, as a reminder for folks, TBT, or the basketball tournament, is an annual summer event that takes place. It's like a 64 team bracketed event. The winning team gets $1 million. Typically, these teams have been kind of formed around colleges. Like I know Louisville has a team. I know the University of Houston has a team. Kentucky has a team. In fact, actually the current Kentucky basketball roster scrimmaged against La Familia, which is the Kentucky TBT roster, which is kind of a fun thing that I think it'd be cool if Gonzaga were able to do that. I believe Gonzaga once had a team a long time ago, like in the early first couple of years of this event. They had a lot of older alumni on that team and didn't do all that well in that event. I don't think they've done one since then, but it would be a lot of fun. And most of these teams, like the Kentucky teams and the other, like there's a Dallas Fort Worth area team, they don't have just players from one school. So I did add a few guys like from Spokane who would be fun to have on this roster, but aren't necessarily Zags. And again, keeping it realistic kind of was a limiting factor because so many of Gonzaga's players are either in the NBA or were trying to make the NBA or are playing overseas. Like, I think it'd be cool to have Rasir Bolton on this team, but Rasir Bolton just left and went over to Italy to start playing for Kevin Pangos' team. And so he wouldn't be a realistic pick. And as desperately as I wanted to put Drew Timme on this team, and I had him on there, and at the last minute I deleted him because I was like, it's just not realistic. Like, there are guys in Summer League, Buddy Boeheim, who is a Syracuse alum, as you may have guessed by his last name, Buddy Boeheim played in a Summer League game and then immediately after the game went to the airport, flew out to where the TBT game was, and then started for the Syracuse team like the next day. So you can do it. And I did pick a few guys who are playing in the Summer League, but Drew has a guaranteed NBA contract, and there's just no way they'll let a guy with that contract play in TBT. So I was like, I don't think I can call that realistic enough to put him on the roster. I did, however, if we're going with the starting five, I did put Killian Tillie at the starting center position. Tillie was very recently in Spokane. In fact, I think he might still currently be in Spokane. So to me, that's good enough to count him as being realistic to have him on the roster. And we needed some bigs desperately. So I got Killian Tillie at the 5. I got Jeremy Jones playing the 4. Jeremy Jones was just playing with the Memphis Summer League team this past week plus in Las Vegas. He'd be a little undersized at the 4, but a former Zag who works hard, plays hard. I think he'd be a fun guy to have on this roster. My first non-Zag at the small forward spot, I got Tyson Degenhart from Boise State, who's from Spokane, went to Mount Spokane High School, was a prolific player for Leon Rice and the Broncos. Would be an incredible get for a Gonzaga team to have Tyson Degenhart on it for the basketball tournament because he is an outstanding player, very good scorer, would probably lead this team in scoring if we're being honest. Shooting guard, Admon Gilder. Gilder's the only player from Gonzaga who's on a TBT roster. He was on that Dallas-Fort Worth team. So obviously a logical addition there. Very good scorer. We only got one season of Gilder in Spokane because he was a senior by the time he transferred over from Texas A&M, and he was dealing with some injuries. So we never really got to see Admon Gilder be the player that I know he's capable of being, but man, he'd be a fun one to have on this roster without a doubt. A lot of options that I was kind of cycling through to go at the point guard position. Ultimately went with Josh Perkins. I considered, I won't say any of the guys I have on the bench here because we'll still get to the bench, but I did consider like Nigel Williams-Goss, but again, he just signed with the team in Lithuania. Kevin Pangos is playing in Italy, so I was like, I don't really think that works. I thought about Nolan Hickman, but again, I think the guys who are competing in Summer League to make NBA rosters probably wouldn't have been willing to do this. So I was like, I didn't put Hickman or Greg or Battle on this roster as much as I would have loved to have any of them in the mix. So it's kind of hard trying to find which point guard I wanted to go with. Perkins has had a prolific professional career, has played in countless countries at this point professionally since he left Gonzaga close to a decade ago, which, man, that feels, I guess it's only like 6 years ago. So we'll pump the brakes on feeling too old here on a Monday morning. But Perkins is such a good passer and just fits this kind of game really, really well. So that's my starting five: Killian, Tillie, Jeremy Jones, Tyson Degenhart, Admon Gilder, and Josh Perkins. My bench is far too guard heavy. Most of Gonzaga's forwards or bigs end up playing professionally. They just don't have very many that would logically fit onto this roster, like from a realistic perspective. I got Ryan Woolridge and Gino Crandall as kind of my backup point guards. Any of those guys could realistically start. I think if you had your choice, you'd probably go Perkins at this point. Woolridge played in the G League for a couple of years, looked very solid at that level. So he would be a really fun one to have here. I should also mention, I actually just kind of thought of him. I know he's playing, he just recently hung him up, so you might have to convince him to come out of retirement. But man, how fun would Jeremy Pargo be in this event? I know he's not only retired, he's actually working in show business at this time. It's been something that I've been planning to talk about on the show when I get a moment to. But Jeremy Pargo would obviously be a perfect player for this type of event. Gino Crandall actually posted on Instagram recently, like, maybe I got to get in the TBT next year. So he's already looking at it. He's interested in it. He'd be a fun guy to have on this roster as well. Has had a very successful professional career, primarily playing in Britain, but also playing in Germany for a while as well. And you got, for my kind of combo guard spots, I have both Malachi Smith and Silas Melson. Silas Melson was recently in Spokane rehabbing an injury that cost him most of last year professionally. So I know he's in the area. He's from Portland area, so would be a fun guy if the rehab's going well and he's able to step out onto the floor. He'd be fun to have on the roster. And then Malachi Smith, guy who obviously was at Gonzaga very recently, really, really good three-point shooter, but can command the offense a little bit as well. Would be a great piece to have on this roster. And then a couple more guys who are non-Gonzaga players because we need some size on this bench. I went with Ethan Price. Ethan Price, 6'10" big man who was at Washington State last year. He's actually from England, but is in a relationship with Esther Little, who just graduated from Gonzaga. So I thought, that's maybe a close enough connection that we can put him on the roster because we just really need some size to make this team be able to compete. And having a Wazoo guy on the team feels like it makes sense when you look at some of these other rosters that typically have 1, 2, 3 guys not from the school that the team is kind of built around. And then since we already have Tyson Degenhart from Boise State, why not go with another Boise State player, somebody who has even more of a connection to Gonzaga? That would be Max Rice, the son of longtime Gonzaga assistant coach and current Boise State head coach Leon Rice. Max Rice is also a small forward, so he'd kind of be Degenhart's backup. So you'd be getting a lot of your minutes at the 3 coming from 2 guys out of Boise State, but much needed on this roster without a lot of other options at those positions for Gonzaga guys who are local or at least in the United States, who aren't signed to an NBA contract, who might be willing to play for a team like this. I'm sure I'm missing some guys, or I'm sure there's players you think I should have added that I didn't. Let me know. I'd love to hear what you think this roster might look like, how it might come together. I think it'd be so fun to put together a team for the basketball tournament. And I'm kind of sad Gonzaga has not been able to or willing to or whatever to do so in the last almost decade or so since the last time they had a team in this event. Well, folks, Ryan Nembhard did plenty to secure his spot in the NBA this upcoming season, but what about Gonzaga's other first-year pros? We're going to talk about that to close out the show coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still hammering through Mailbag Monday here to close out the show. We got 2 more questions. This first one comes from Aaron via Gmail. Aaron says, which of Gonzaga's Summer League rookies not named Ryan Nembhard has the best chance of playing in the NBA this season? Yeah, the answer is definitely Ryan Nembhard. So that is fair to have that be the caveat here. Ryan obviously played fantastic. He was on the two-way contract, which two-way contracts, assuming you stay on that contract, they guarantee you a certain number of days on the NBA roster, like on the bench with the team, part of the active roster. They don't guarantee you that you are going to play in the NBA. They can put you on the roster and just keep you on the bench, but it does guarantee you that spot. And again, a team wouldn't sign you to a two-way contract unless they envisioned playing you at the NBA level at some point, considering Dallas has a issue with the amount of guards they have on the roster with Kyrie Irving's injury. They did sign D'Angelo Russell, but Nembhard's going to play for that team without a doubt. The other three guys, it's much less confident that they will play in the NBA at all this year. I think we can eliminate Ben Gregg. Ben Gregg had 13 points and 8 rebounds in his final summer league game with the Boston Celtics, which was awesome to see. Big shout out to Ben for having a big game for Boston. But he has already signed a professional contract in France with Strasbourg and is planning to head there in a month or so. So he's not even going to be in the United States. He is not going to get the opportunity to play in the NBA because he chose to sign with France. In France, excuse me. That leaves us to either Nolan Hickman or Khalif Battle. Both had strong performances to close out Summer League. Hickman had 13 points in his last game with Dallas. Looked good, was commanding the paint, or was commanding the ball, was playing the point guard position, had a couple shake and bakes, getting to the rim and scoring. It was really nice to see him kind of break out of his comfort zone a little bit and play a role that we hadn't really seen him play much at Gonzaga, and kind of show, at least in that game, that he's capable of doing it. However, I think my answer is Khalif Battle. Khalif Battle is a bigger, and he's like Nolan Hickman has an NBA skill set. That's the three-point shooting, but his size limits him defensively, and he's not much of a point guard. Again, he played well in that last game, but I think for a non-point guard to make the NBA at his size, you'd have to be like elite as a shooter. And Hickman is very good, but I'm not sure he's quite good enough to make up for his defensive limitations and his kind of lack of offensive versatility. Whereas Battle, he's a little bit bigger. He works very hard defensively. I'm not actually even sure that he's a better defensive player, but he's got more size, which I think helps him in that space. And he's more capable of getting downhill, of getting fouled, of getting to the rim, getting to the free throw line. The three-point shot is not as consistent for Battle, but when he does have it, he's a more well-rounded offensive player. So I think he just has a slight advantage. To be honest, I'm not sure either of them. Like if you told me I had to pick 0, 1, 2, or 3 out of those guys in terms of how many of them are going to play in the NBA this year, I think I would say 0. And I hope I'm wrong. Like, I hope it's 1. I hope it's 2. I don't think it'll be 3 because that would require Ben Gregg to break his contract in France. And I just don't think that's going to happen. I'd love to say it's 2 of them, that it's both Hickman and Battle, but I think it's more likely to be 0 than 2. I think those guys, if they choose to stay here, will both have productive careers in the G League. And you never know. You never know. You play well enough in the G League, you get called up. That happens. We saw it with Drew Timme. We've seen it with other guys in the past. So it could absolutely happen, but I'm not holding my breath for either of those guys or any of those 3 guys to be NBA players this season, or maybe ever, although I certainly don't want to claim there's no chance for them. I'm just not sure I see it for this year. Final question of the show comes from ZagFan2319 on Discord, who says, with the WNBA adding 2 teams in 2026 in Portland and Toronto, do you think that opens the door for someone like Yvonne Ejim to make it into the league? I do. I hope so. At least. I think obviously not only the fact that there's 2 new teams starting, which means there's opening up 20 plus roster spots for players there's going to be 20 more WNBA players next year than there were this year. Like, that alone is a compelling fact for somebody like Yvonne, who was one of the last players cut from the Indiana Fever during training camp this year. I don't know that she's necessarily one of the 20 best players not currently in the WNBA. My instinct is to say probably not. There's a lot of really good players who didn't make the league. Yvonne is certainly among them, but I'm not sure that she's quite in that conversation. But it's certainly working in her favor that the 2 teams that are starting next year, one of them is based in the Pacific Northwest, and one of them is based in her home country. That's a pretty darn good advantage. If Toronto's looking to fill out their roster, they got 1, 2, 3 spots left. They just need somebody to come into training camp and maybe fill a backup center role or a backup position, a 9th, 10th player on the roster. Wouldn't you want that to be somebody from Canada? Canada has a decent amount of success in the women's basketball. They've played well. They didn't do great in the Olympics this past year, but guess who was on that Olympic roster? Yvonne Ejim. And so if Toronto wants to add somebody who's local to the country, who represents the country with pride, wears the Canada on her chest, like Yvonne's a really darn good pick for that. So I would love to see Toronto pick up Yvonne. I would also love Portland to pick up Yvonne because I'm planning to go to a lot of Portland Fire games when they're here next year. I live close by. I really want to get involved in following that team. And I tell you what, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier for me to be invested in that team if they got somebody that I watched for 5 years in Spokane and Yvonne Ejim on the roster. So yes, I think that this helps. I think that this helps the odds for them and anybody else who just missed making a roster, who was one of the last cuts. I think it'll make the draft in the future be more likely to, if you're picked outside of the first round, you don't feel like, oh, well, there goes my chances of even making the roster, which is just insanity. But that's what happens in the WNBA. But as we've said before, Brenna Maxwell 2 years ago was the 13th pick in the WNBA draft, folks. That's a lottery pick in the NBA. And yes, obviously there's more than 2 times as many teams in the NBA. I get that. But 13th player selected in the WNBA draft did not ever play a game in the WNBA. That is crazy to me that is happening in that league. And I think adding 2 more teams, and then, Cleveland's coming, Detroit's coming. They're adding more teams after this. They're expanding all the way up to 16 in a pretty rapid amount of time because they're capitalizing on the meteoric growth of the league that we've seen in the last year or 2 since Caitlin Clark came into the league, frankly. But they're capitalizing on that growth. They're adding more teams. They're adding more roster spots. This is a net good for the sport collectively, and it's good for players like Yvonne Ejim who have a better chance of sticking professionally in the WNBA and not being forced to go play overseas or play in a 3-on-3 league around here, and instead having the opportunity to play at the highest level in the United States, which again is good for the sport, good for fans, good for college fans who get to see their favorite players stay stateside or stay in North America, I should say. Shout out Toronto and get that opportunity. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Special shout out to those everyday listeners as well, and those of you subscribed on YouTube. It's very, very appreciated. If you haven't done so yet, just go to youtube.com, search Locked On Zags, find that bell button, hit that subscribe button. You will get notified whenever there's a new show, and it is very appreciated by me. We got a couple more shows this week. We got a fun interview with Theo Lawson lined up of the Spokesman Review. And then I'm going to be out of town for a couple of days. So that's probably when we'll get an update on Tyon Grant-Foster's waiver. Hopefully I'll get a chance to tell you about that if it does happen in the next couple of days. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.